I remember the day that we first heard about it, and we heard 4 college kids killed over in Idaho.
New details in the deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. Police say the 4 victims were targeted, and the killer or killers used a knife or other type of edged weapon in this attack.
For now, police are calling the deaths homicides after responding to initial reports of an unconscious person on a road near the University golf courses.
We do not have a suspect at this time, and that individual is still out there. We cannot say that there's no threat to the community.
It wasn't until the days that followed that we really understood the magnitude of what happened and the horror of what happened in that house.
The county coroner gave out new details about the stabbing deaths, saying that the students were in their beds, likely asleep when they were killed. The coroner telling News Nation that she believes that the killer must have been very angry in order to stab 4 people to death.
This was obviously someone who was enraged at these victims. They were knifed. And the people, the police and so on, who came to the scene said that this was the bloodiest crime scene they'd ever seen.
And you know, the blood
were very attractive, very popular, very smart, very cool kids. And this fit into who an incel would hate.
Hey, Elliot Rodger here. I'm up in the hills in Montecito right now. It's truly a beautiful day, but I've been alone for a very long time. I've been attending college in Santa Barbara for about 2.5 years now. And in those 2.5 years, I've experienced nothing but loneliness and misery. And my problem is girls. There are so many beautiful girls here, but none of them give me a chance.
Starting from the beginning, there were red flags that led up to this murder that should have been noticed beforehand. First of all, he was a very awkward child. That is part of the reason why he had such trouble when he was in middle school asking girls to date him. When he was in middle school, he had a crush on a blonde cheerleader who looked very much like Kaylee Gonsalves, and she refused to date him. This continued throughout his life. I mean, even more recently, when he would go into a bar in Pennsylvania, they had a notation next to his name that to warn the female staff that he was a bit strange.
His aunt said it was above and beyond being vegan. Apparently his aunt and uncle had to buy new pots and pans because he would not eat from anything that had ever had meat cooked in them. He seemed very OCD, which, if family members noticed that, that would be quite spot on based on legal documents that we've read through recently, which say that he has been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum disorder, as well as diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. So it does make sense. If they're like, wow, he's really OCD, that's not just a word, or a phrase to throw out there. He really suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder, because it's so much more than just being like a little bit neat or arranging things a certain way. It's intrusive thoughts, it's these obsessions, and people really suffer from it. So Bryan had a middle school crush, Kim Kennelly.
So an incel is a young man who has been rejected by women in his whole history of trying to get women to have sex with him, to go out with him. And we have, yes, that article, for example, talks about this one girl, Kim, who he left letters for, love notes and so on, who he kept pestering, and he wouldn't take no, and she kept rejecting him, and all the popular girls were rejecting him and throwing things at him, bullying him, and so on. And
so apparently he actually turned into a bit of a bully. So that's not acceptable either. If you know what it feels like to be bullied, then you can't go on to not bully other people. But so often that happens, right? The cycle repeats, which is why bullying is just so painful.
He would just he would grapple me and put me in headlocks and arm bars and stuff like that.
And so this is indicative, there are many other things that relate to this that are indicative of his having had this pattern throughout his life of being rejected by women, and not just rejected, like a lot of people get rejected, but incels build up the rage and they have groups online and so on where they egg each other on. And so it's really, we see the beginnings of it in middle school. That's when he first left these love notes. And now we take it, all the way to his leaving DMs and trying to follow these.
So they attended Pleasant Valley Intermediate School in Broadheadsville, Pennsylvania together. Her mom said that Kohberger became relentless in his pursuit. I would like to insert the word entitled. It's just, you'll see why in a moment. Repeatedly leaving love letters in her locker and telling her that he liked her. He would always say, "Oh, Kim, I think you're very pretty." Just like weird comments, and she'd say, "Oh my God, leave me alone." Her mom said that she didn't give Kohberger the time of day, and she eventually told him to just buzz off.
The important part and the seed of these murders really started in junior high school when he was rejected, and continued because he became an incel. An incel is a young man who has a hatred, deep hatred towards women because they feel that have been spurned by them.
The evidence against Kohberger seems at this point to be pretty damning, with detectives and prosecutors seemingly keeping some evidence close to their chests before the trial starts. So how then did a user profile on Facebook accurately predict what law enforcement would find at the crime scene and the timeline of events leading up to the murders? A gag order by the courts has prevented authorities and even the victims' families from elaborating or clarifying the details of the case, creating an information vacuum that online sleuths are trying to fill with speculation and wild theories. One of these theories is that before being arrested for the quadruple murders, Kohberger masqueraded as Pappa Rodger on a Facebook group discussing the murders. Just over 2 weeks after the murders, on November 30th, the first Pappa Rodger post appeared on a Facebook discussion group called University of Idaho Murders Case Discussion. The post read, "Of the evidence released, the murder weapon has been consistent as a large fixed blade knife. This leads me to believe they found the sheath." This post proved to be prophetic as the knife sheath discovery was only made public on January 5th when the probable cause affidavit was released. On the same day, Pappa Rodger made another eerie comment, this time stating exactly where the killer or killers entered the house. "I believe the killer or killers came from the high side of the house. They were covered in blood after the attack. This high side of the house was where Dylan Mortensen, a surviving roommate of the victims, saw the suspect and described him as a male stranger around 5 feet 10 inches and not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows, leaving through the back sliding door." When dissecting this post, online sleuths made another connection after Kohberger was arrested. After being booked into Monroe County Jail, Kohberger allegedly asked police whether anyone else had been arrested in connection with the murders. Online sleuths believe that the opening sentence in the post, "I believe the killer, killers," and Kohberger's comment after being arrested is far from a coincidence. On December 1st, Pappa Rodger would post again saying, "This is the high side of the house. They found evidence here. It is likely blood droppings from the killer. Either they fled through this area or they were parked there." This being the most strategic entrance point to the house, it shows planning. When the probable cause affidavit was released, it stated that the white Elantra that Kohberger apparently used to get to and from the crime scene had been seen multiple times on Queen Road, which is just behind the high side of the house. If Kohberger is indeed Pappa Rodger, this post could be interpreted as a boast about how much planning the murders took.
The investigators said it was the bloodiest crime scene they had ever seen. And it was a personal crime scene. It was done by a knife, which is a very personal way of killing, which speaks of the intense hatred that the murderer had for the victims. And then they described the victims as being these 4 very attractive, very popular, very studious students with a good future ahead of them.
Now, somebody said to the Daily Mail, an anonymous source said, the whole clique of popular girls made fun of him in school. They were the cheerleaders and the ones that every kid had crushes on. So top right is a picture of that high school crush. Bottom right is a picture of 2 out of the 4 victims, one being the speculated main target, Madison Mogan, and next to her, Kaylee Gonsalves, right? So that is just speculation. They literally, this is a quote again, they literally tortured him. Girls started making fun of him in middle school.
These perfect girls and boys, men and women, they call them the girl Stacy's and the men Chad. And that is who he killed, allegedly. You know, they were people who he had been attracted to before the crime, ever since he got to Washington and started going on the University of Idaho campus. In particular, Kaylee, because she, again, resembled his first love, the first rejection that he got when he was younger.
Middle school. Another former classmate said, "It's interesting to me that the girls he's accused of killing were nice looking and seemingly popular, much like the ones that made fun of him throughout his childhood." So I think that already gives us just a little glimpse of a very plausible motive.
On December 2nd, another post leaning towards strategy and planning was posted, saying, "Did the killer drive or walk from the scene? Thoughts?" On December 5th, Pappa Rodger would step up his posting by adding a floor plan of the house and where he thought Xana's body was found. Based on the evidence, this is where I believe Xana was found. How Pappa Rodger had access to the floor plan of the house and where Xana's room was is still to be determined. Kohberger's white Elantra is seen as critical evidence by prosecutors in the case against him. On December 7th, police revealed they were checking records for around 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras manufactured between 2011 and 2013. A camera in the vicinity of the victim's home recorded footage of a white or light-colored Elantra around the time of the killings, which detectives discovered had made numerous runs along the same route near the property. Another security camera showed an Elantra driving by the victim's residence 3 times, starting at about 3:29 a.m. At 4:04 a.m., the Elantra drove past for the 4th time. At 4:20 a.m., the car was seen driving away from the victim's location. The next day, on December 8th, Pappa Rodger posted, "I feel like the white car isn't relevant." This post has been interpreted by online sleuths as a moment if Kohberger is actually Pappa Rodger, when he realizes that maybe law enforcement is on his heels and is trying to minimize an essential piece of evidence.
I think the time at WSU, when he wasn't doing well as a teaching assistant, you know, he was having issues with professors, he was having issues with the students, and then all sorts of things started stacking up. It probably was a super triggering time for him. However, yeah, that's not how one deals with trauma or triggers. No matter how much rage.
It has been reported that he stalked, and her friends even tried to walk behind her so that they would protect her. They told this to someone who worked at one of the stores that they went into.
Ever have the full truth outside of court, outside of these days. I think that he's going to want power, so he's going to hold on to a lot of the true motivations. You look at guys like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, they always told lies. They would have confessions, they would have interviews, and so much of what they said wasn't true. So there's lots of motivations they've talked about that were complete nonsense, and I could see something similar happening here. So ever having a truly meaningful or satisfying answer, I think, is unlikely.
So I was going to ask you about that. So you're saying that you think that the fact that they didn't respond, that she didn't respond to his DMs, triggers, in effect, this response from him, which is this fury and rage as the guy who's been rejected all his life, and then he plots out these murders?
Right. And to be fair, we don't know whether the person he sent the DMs to actually saw his DMs, but he never got a response. So whether she saw them or not, it was the same rejection to him. And it's a rage. I mean, think about it, just from at least middle school that this has been happening with lots of women, happening, in fact, in Pennsylvania at a bar where they noted, even just recently, before he was arrested, that he used to come in there and harass the staff, the females, and, try to come on to them, and they would reject him, and they put it in the notes that if someone came in with this ID, his ID, to be very careful of him.